Hello, I'm Achut Nair from Nair's Aviation Ground School. This is the 40th video in a new series of educational and informative aviation videos for the aspiring pilot. The aviation world is multi-layered and varied, and as a student pilot progresses through their training, they will be introduced to new topics, regulations, and operating conditions. Initially, all pilots start out with visual flight rules or the VFR stage, and as they gain experience and knowledge, they will transition onto the next stage. This video is about Instrument Flight Rules or IFR for short. Instrument Flight Rules or IFR is one of the two sets of regulations governing all aspects of civil aviation aircraft operations. The other, of course, is VFR. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration's Instrument Flying Handbook defines IFR as rules and regulations established by the FAA to govern flight under conditions in which flight by outside visual reference is not safe. IFR flight depends on flying by reference to instruments in the flight deck, and navigation is accomplished by reference to electronic signals. It is also a term used by pilots and controllers to indicate the type of flight plan an aircraft is flying, such as an IFR or VFR flight plan. To put instrument flight rules into context, a brief overview of visual flight rules or VFR is necessary. It is possible and fairly straightforward in relatively clear weather conditions to fly an airplane solely by reference to outside visual cues, such as the horizon to maintain orientation, nearby buildings and terrain features for navigation, and other aircraft to maintain separation. This is known as operating the aircraft under VFR and is the most common mode of operation for small aircraft. However, it is safe to fly VFR only when these outside references can be clearly seen from a sufficient distance. When flying through or above clouds, or in fog, rain, dust, or similar low-level weather conditions, these references can become obscured. Thus, cloud ceiling and flight visibility are the most important variables for safe operation during all phases of flight. The minimum weather conditions for ceiling and visibility for VFR flights are defined in that country's National Flight Regulations Handbook and can vary depending on the type of airspace in which the aircraft is operating and on whether the flight is conducted during daytime or nighttime. However, typical daytime VFR minimums for most airspace is 3 statute miles of flight visibility and a distance from clouds of 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 feet horizontally. Flight conditions reported as equal to or greater than these VFR minimums are referred to as visual meteorological conditions or VMC. Any aircraft operating under VFR must have the required equipment on board, as described by the necessary regulations, depending on the country in which you fly. The necessary VFR requirements might also include some instruments necessary for IFR flight. VFR pilots may use cockpit instruments as secondary aids to navigation and orientation, but are not required to. The view outside the aircraft is a primary source for keeping the aircraft straight and level, orientation, flying to the intended destination, navigation, and not hitting anything, which is separation. Visual flight rules are generally simpler than instrument flight rules and require significantly less training and practice. VFR provides a great degree of freedom, allowing pilots to go where they want, when they want, and allows them a much wider latitude in determining how they get there. When operation of an aircraft under VFR is not safe because the visual cues outside the aircraft are obscured by weather, instrument flight rules must be used instead. IFR permits an aircraft to operate in instrument meteorological conditions, or IMC, which is essentially any weather condition less than VMC, but in which aircraft can still operate safely. Use of instrument flight rules is also required when flying in Class A airspace, regardless of weather conditions. Class A airspace extends from 18,000 feet above mean sea level to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet pressure altitude, above the contiguous 48 United States and overlying waters within 12 miles thereof. Similar airspace is available in different countries under different terminology. Flight in Class A airspace requires pilots and aircraft to be instrument equipped and rated and to be operating under instrument flight rules. In many countries, commercial airliners and their pilots must operate under IFR as the majority of flights enter Class A airspace. However, aircraft operating as commercial airliners must operate under IFR even if the flight plan does not take the craft into Class A airspace, such as with smaller regional flights. Procedures and training are significantly more complex compared to VFR instruction, as the pilot must demonstrate competency in conducting an entire cross-country flight solely by reference to flight instruments. The distance by which an aircraft avoids obstacles to other aircraft is termed separation. The most important concept of IFR flying is that separation is maintained, regardless of weather conditions. In controlled airspace, air traffic control, or ATC, separates IFR aircraft from obstacles in other aircraft, using flight clearance based on route, time, distance, speed, and altitude. ATC monitors IFR flights on radar or through aircraft position reports in areas where radar coverage is not available. Aircraft position reports are sent as voice radio transmissions. In the United States, a flight operating under IFR is required to provide position reports unless ATC advises the pilot that the plane is in radar contact. The pilot must resume position reports after ATC advises that radar contact has been lost or that radar services have been terminated. IFR flights in controlled airspace require an ATC clearance for each part of that flight. A clearance always specifies a clearance limit, which is the farthest the aircraft can fly without a new clearance. In addition, a clearance typically provides a heading or route to follow, altitude, and communication parameters, such as frequencies and transponder codes. In uncontrolled airspace, ATC clearances are unavailable. In some states, a form of separation is provided to certain aircraft in uncontrolled airspace, as far as is practical, often known under ICAO as Advisory Service in Class G airspace. But separation is not mandated nor widely provided. Despite the protection offered by flight in controlled airspace under IFR, the ultimate responsibility for the safety of the aircraft rests with the pilot in command, who can refuse clearances. In addition to making sure the pilot is qualified, the aircraft used in IFR flight must also be qualified. The aircraft must be equipped and type certified for instrument flight, and the related navigational equipment must have been inspected or tested within a specific period of time prior to the instrument flight. In the United States, instruments required for IFR flight, in addition to those required for VFR flight, are the heading indicator, sensitive altimeter adjustable for barometric pressure, a clock with a sweep second pointer or digital equivalent, attitude indicator, radios, and suitable avionics for the route to be flown, alternator or generator, gyroscopic rate of turn indicator that is either a turn coordinator or a turn and back indicator. Instrument pilots must meticulously evaluate weather, create a very detailed flight plan based around specific instrument departures en route and arrival procedures, and dispatch the flight. Instrument weather conditions will be covered in depth in an upcoming video. Instrument flying opens a whole new world to the student pilot. Earning one's instrument rating can allow the pilot to fly in diverse conditions and greatly expand their aviation horizons. Any student pilot who wants to fly commercially or for the airlines need to go through the instrument flight training. It is of utmost importance that the student pilot is familiar with the instrument flight operations to grow their experience and expand their possibilities. For more information, please contact us at liftanddrag@gmail.com and visit our website at nyersaviation.webnode.com. Also visit our YouTube channel, Nyers Aviation, on YouTube. Thank you. Safe flying.